Afternoon adventurers. We've got the E spells today, spells that have changed in the new Player's Handbook 2024 that start with the letter E. There aren't as many as, say, C had a lot, or D, but some of them have changed pretty significantly. So without wasting any more time introing, let's get right into this list, starting with Earthquake. Earthquake used to break creatures' concentration at the beginning of the spell when it's first initially cast, provided spellcasters in the area fail a con save. That is no longer true. Now, breaking concentration is tied directly to the prone effect that the spell imposes on a dexterity saving throw every single round, which means it is going to be even stronger against spellcasters. The caster now chooses how many fissures appear and where, instead of leaving that up to DM discretion. It is still up to a maximum of 6, and they still do essentially the same thing, except now they don't automatically take down structures. The damage taken by creatures buried in rubble when a structure does collapse has increased from 5d6 to 12d6. That is a significant boost, which frankly I feel like is a little overdue. The spell should deal plenty of damage having that much rubble fall on you, but who knows. Anyway, it's 12d6 now. Language has been removed from the spell's description that previously allowed DMs to adjust the DC to escape from the rubble. Now it is a flat 20 all the time. And last, for what it's worth, the spell is now transmutation instead of evocation. There's a new spell called Elementalism, which is a cantrip that is in the vein of prestidigitation, thaumaturgy, druidcraft, those kind of low-level minor effects on the world around you kind of cantrips, mostly for role-playing more than actual usage, but it's there if you want it. It kind of seems like a replacement for Gust, Shape Water, Mold Earth, and Control Flames, the elemental cantrips that were originally in the Elemental Evil Player's Companion and Princes of the Apocalypse, and then reprinted in Xanathar's Guide to Everything, but it doesn't do pretty much any of the stuff that those cantrips do, so not really a reason to take this instead of those, whereas Shape Water, for example, can propel a small watercraft or make a little wall of ice, things like that. This cantrip won't be doing those things, but it's good for flavor if we've got an extra cantrip slot open, which, to be fair, we probably won't. Enhance ability has changed in that it no longer has secondary effects for its strength, dexterity, and constitution variants. Now it only gives advantage to the checks and saving throws of those ability scores, just like intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. The spell now specifies that when we upcast it, the additional targets, we can choose which effect they get. It was ambiguous on that before. I think most DMs allowed it. I always allowed it, but now it is set in stone that you get to choose for each target which ability score is affected. So that's better. The material component no longer specifies fur or a feather from a beast. So if we have, for example, a 7-foot long rock feather or an owlbear feather, those are monstrosities. Those count now. As per usual, these things are usually taken care of by a spellcasting focus or a component pouch. They usually don't end up mattering that much, but if you want to use the actual material component for roleplay or for any other reason, there you go. Enlarge Reduce now specifies that a piece of ammunition or a thrown weapon returns to its normal size after hitting or missing its target. So no more shenanigans with reducing a boulder and then throwing it, having it return to its normal size mid-flight, things like that. I never really engaged with that kind of stuff, but I read about it in forums. It's not a thing. Technically, we can release concentration on a spell anytime we want, so kind of it still works, but no, just no. Its effects no longer specify that the target is doubled in size or halved in size in all dimensions. Doesn't say anything about that, it's just that your size category increases or decreases. And it also doesn't mention any changes to weight. Not that most things in the game really reference a creature's weight anymore. It's not in the character creation species sections. We might be able to choose our character's weight when making the character for sort of flavor purposes, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter for most things, so they've sort of nixed it. And finally, the 1d4 bonus or penalty to weapon damage now applies to unarmed strikes specifically, which it didn't mention before. So you can enlarge the party monk and let them go ham with an extra d4 of damage. Ensnaring Strike is now a prompted bonus action like our Smite spells, where when we hit a creature with a weapon, we can choose to cast the spell at that time with our bonus action, instead of having to cast it first and then next time we hit with a weapon attack, then it applies. That's how it used to work. It's smoother now. The spell also uses a strength athletics check instead of a raw strength check for creatures to try to break free, so the few creatures that have proficiency in athletics will be slightly better at that. It's not going to come up a whole lot. Most creatures don't have proficiencies, although I suppose that could change in the new monster manual, as I have not seen it yet. It is not available to the public yet. Entangle now affects creatures other than the caster. It specifies that, so you can target your own space if you would like and hit creatures around you with the effect without affecting yourself. That's a plus. And much like Ensnaring Strike, it now uses an athletics check to break free instead of normal strength. Enthrall has changed fairly greatly. It now requires concentration, though it doesn't require creatures to be able to hear you at the time of casting. It now applies a -10 penalty instead of disadvantage, and applies to all wisdom perception checks that the targets make, instead of only against creatures other than the caster. So now the caster can cast this, and then hide as well along with the rest of their party. The penalty also explicitly applies to passive perception, although I don't think the spell actually needs to say that because that's how the general rules on passive perception work. It's 10 plus any relevant modifiers, but it's nice that the spell calls it out for clarity anyway. And the spell no longer ends if the caster finds themselves unable to speak. That probably doesn't come up that much, but a little bit of a quality of life improvement there, I suppose. Etherealness is now conjuration instead of transmutation, though that's the only change. It still works the same way it always has. Evard's Black Tentacles now restrains and deals damage when cast instead of waiting until the start of creatures' turns, and when a creature enters the area or ends its turn there. This is a pretty common change among AoE spells in general. Things like Cloud Kill and Blade Barrier do the same thing. Restrained creatures now get to make the saving throw at the start of their turns instead of automatically taking the damage, so there's a chance to take half damage instead. Restrained creatures use Strength Athletics to break free. This seems to be a running theme with these entangling spells, rather than raw strength, but can no longer choose to use Dexterity instead, which used to be a thing. Targets used to be able to choose either Strength or Dexterity to make an ability check to escape Everard's Black Tentacles. That is no longer the case. Now they have to use Strength Athletics. And lastly, told you there were fewer of these, Eye Bite. The Sickened effect, specifically, is the only one that's changed. It now applies the poison condition. Instead of imposing its own effect, which it describes, now it simply poisons the target, that's it. That does mean certain creatures will be immune to the effect entirely, and some, mostly dwarves, will have advantage on the saving throw against it, which is kind of weird that they have advantage or immunity from this one part of the spell but not the others, but c'est la vie. On the plus side, targets don't get more saving throws to end the spell early, to end this effect early, I mean. They are poisoned for the whole time, or they succeed their saving throw and they're not poisoned at all. Keep in mind, Eye Bite uses our entire action each round to continue applying it to creatures, but poisoning multiple creatures over the first few rounds could actually be really useful. It's a pretty strong debuff when it can apply. And that is all for the E's. Like I said, there weren't really that many that changed. There aren't that many spells that start with E to begin with, but some of them pretty significant. Anyway, that is all for today. That's all I have to say. So thank you for watching, and liking, subscribing, all that kind of YouTube goodness, and I will see you in the next one, the letter F, in case that wasn't obvious. Happy adventuring.